Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and welcome to the very last Eliminator of the 2016 college football season. There's no reason to have an Eliminator next week because we will already know who is in the playoff at that time. We will already know all of our conference champions. So this is the very last one of 2016. This has been a really cool video series that I've been able to do. I really have enjoyed making this. I enjoy talking about it and hearing back from you guys. So I wish I would have thought about this at the beginning of the year instead of closer to the last third of the year. So I'll definitely be doing this again next year. So thank you guys. So in last week's Eliminator, we talked about how there was, in my opinion, 10 teams left for the national championship, including Western Michigan, who I still have in there, even though the College Football Playoff Committee hates them. And because they're undefeated, I keep them in there, and it's just fun to talk about them. But with Ohio State's victory over Michigan, albeit not without controversy, of course, in 2 overtimes at the Horseshoe, I have thus eliminated Michigan. So now there are 9 teams that I feel can fill the 4 spots and lead us into the 2016 College Football Playoff. This week, at least 2 of those 9 will be eliminated as Penn State faces Wisconsin in the Big Ten Championship, and Oklahoma faces Oklahoma State in the de facto Big 12 Championship. Before I get into the actual Eliminator and talk about each team and their chances and all that fun stuff, I do want to mention the bowl system. So last week, I did not mention teams that were ineligible for bowls or teams that were on the brink, and that is because, as usual, there's too many bowl games to properly fill the slots with everyone who doesn't even have a winning record, who just has a 6-6 record. So we're going to have at least, I believe, 5 teams that are 5-7 make it in this year. Last year we had 4. So that sucks, and that's something that needs to change, but it won't because of money. Those 5 teams will be chosen based on their highest APR, I believe, over the last 2 years. I have no idea who that'll be, so we will all be as surprised as each other based on what happens on Sunday at the Bowl Selection Show. All right, so let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is I think only the top 10 teams have a realistic shot to get in. I'm going to talk about all 10 of them, even Michigan, who I think is pretty much ruled out, but we'll talk about them, and I'll kind of go down the list, and I'm going to save Ohio State for last because they are clearly the wild card. They are clearly the biggest story in college football right now, so I'm going to save them for last because I kind of have some thoughts on it, and what I think, in my humble opinion, should happen to them is based entirely upon what happens to the other teams in this list, so I want to talk about them first. I'm also going to delve into a conspiracy theory that I think I will tell you later on in the video. Now I'm going to do 3 really quick. Alabama, Clemson, and Washington win, and you're in. That's it. If you're Clemson and Washington and you happen to lose, I think you're both out of it. If either of you lose to Virginia Tech or Colorado, you're done. You're out of it. Alabama's a little bit of a different story. If they lose to a not great Florida team, in my opinion, they should be out of it, but they're Alabama. They won't be out of it. I don't think their case is very good. They beat a 3-loss USC team. They beat a 7-loss Ole Miss team. They beat a 7 or 8-loss Mississippi State team, a 3-loss LSU team. They will have lost to a 3-loss Florida team. They beat a 4-loss Auburn team, a 4-loss Tennessee team, a 4-loss Texas A&M team. So you tell me what their schedule, who on their schedule impresses you as far as their win-loss record. In fact, the best teams they beat are probably LSU and USC, who have combined for 6 losses on the year. Assuming they win, they're in. Next, we're going to go to number 5, Michigan, who I have as eliminated, but they are number 5 in this week's college football playoff poll. So I definitely think they're deserving of something to talk about. I think the best case scenario for Michigan is Colorado winning the Pac-12 North, beating Washington, because Michigan beat both teams in the Big Ten Championship, and they beat Colorado. So in that case, they will have wins over the Big Ten champion and the Pac-12 champion. The problem for Michigan is Ohio State is ranked number 2, ranked higher than them. And obviously Ohio State beat Michigan. If Wisconsin beats Penn State and Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, Ohio State can also claim wins over 2 conference champions, leaving Michigan kind of squeezed out there at the end, even though they only lost to the Buckeyes on the road in 2 overtimes on a controversial call. They only won one game outside of the state of Michigan this year, and that was at Rutgers. Now, for number 6, Wisconsin, I think they kind of got screwed. If you were Wisconsin last week, you were probably rooting for Michigan State so you could play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis. Beating Ohio State would essentially grant you all access into the college football playoff, but because Penn State advanced, beating them won't have the cachet that beating Ohio State team, getting that redemptive win over the Buckeyes would. It just wouldn't, even though Penn State beat Ohio State. So I think your case is a little bit worse. So if you're Wisconsin this weekend, you are a big Virginia Tech fan, and you are a big Colorado fan. Wisconsin's best non-conference win obviously was LSU, but the Tigers now have 4 losses on the year, which doesn't look great. They did lose to Ohio State and Michigan, which doesn't look fantastic, but they only lost by 7 points each. Ohio State was in overtime, and they would have the Big Ten championship on their side, which means a lot this year. And they would have beaten an East team, and the East is clearly the superior division in the conference right now. They would have beaten an East team to get into the title game. So Wisconsin certainly has a heck of a case, but if it's between Wisconsin and Ohio State, and Wisconsin says, I have a division championship and a conference championship, Ohio State can say, we beat you in Madison. Number 7 is Penn State. Now, they are in a weird position where they are not getting any respect from the College Football Playoff Committee, even though they're a 10-2 team. Their 2 losses, by the way, are against a Michigan team that just fell from number 2 to number 5. They have 2 losses and they're still number 5. And a Pittsburgh team that also beat Clemson, who the committee seems to have no problem respecting. This is a Penn State team that struggled early. They lost late in the game against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, and they lost to Michigan badly. I think the final score in that game was 41-10, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around there. They lost badly to Michigan, but they improved all year long. They beat Ohio State at home in a whiteout. They crushed a Michigan State team that the week before held Ohio State to what should have been an overtime game if Michigan State did not go for 2. By the way, Michigan State, you helped cause all this mess, because if you would have gone into overtime, there's a chance you could have won, and this would have eliminated all of this problem. If Penn State wins the Big Ten, if they beat Wisconsin in Indianapolis on Saturday night, why should they not be in the playoff? They improved vastly over the course of the season. Again, their 2 losses are not bad losses, especially now that Pitt is ranked again. They beat Ohio State. They beat Wisconsin, who's a top 10 team. They won the Big Ten championship. The idea has always been lose early. If you're going to lose early. They lost early, and they got better as the year went on. I think they are suffering from the same thing that Colorado is suffering from, which is they're going up against teams like Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Clemson, who was in the college football playoff last year. They're going up against teams that historically, especially recently, have done well. And I think that the committee is in part holding some of that history against Penn State, and I don't think that's fair. I just want to let you know, Penn State, I feel for you. I think, this is just me, I think if Penn State wins the Big Ten championship, there is no way Ohio State should be able to get in. But that's just one guy sitting in his living room in South Carolina. That's what I think. Number 8 is Colorado. So, like I said, I think Colorado is suffering from an optics problem in the same way that Penn State is, and they are behind all of the Big Ten teams, which makes me think even if they beat Washington, they have no shot of getting in, which I think is a shame. Their only losses on the year are against a Michigan team and USC. Michigan is number 5 in the country right now, and USC ended the year as one of the hottest teams in the country and ranked number 11. They suffered through injuries, and yes, some of their bigger games happened to be at home this year, but that's just scheduling. Colorado doesn't control that. Their loss to Michigan was on the road. Once again, personally, and this is just me, I think that if Colorado wins against Washington, especially if it's convincing, that they have a very good case to get in the college football playoff. The problem is that loss to Michigan. Michigan can look at the committee and say, why in the world should Colorado get in to the playoff? We beat them. We should be ranked higher than them. We both have 2 losses. That's a pretty good case too. Next up at number 9 and number 10, we have the 2 Bedlam teams in Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. For Oklahoma, their case is pretty simple. They lost 2 of their first 3 games, which are not great, but the teams they lost to were quality opponents. Houston went on to struggle a little bit this season, but Houston's a really good team. Look at what they did to Louisville. They would have gone undefeated through Big 12 play, been the undeniable Big 12 conference champion. I think they have a very good case. They're one of the hottest teams in the country right now. Their offense can match up against anyone's other offense. Not their defense. Their defense is pretty bad. But their offense can match up with anyone with Mayfield, Mixon, and Pirine. The problem with Oklahoma is if they win the Big 12, all that does is strengthen Ohio State's case. Ohio State can say, yeah, we beat the Big 12 champion. And just like Colorado, if Colorado wins, Michigan's ahead of them. If Oklahoma wins, Ohio State is ahead of them and should be able to kind of block them out. Now, Oklahoma State is a little bit different case. See, if they win the Big 12, well, they win the Big 12. Their out-of-conference schedule included 1 loss to Central Michigan on a play that should not have happened, and for some reason the NCAA has this dumb rule where if the game should be ended but continues, they go on with that result. It hurt Duke last year, and it really hurt Oklahoma State this year. They would have also ended the year killing TCU, and they would have beaten previously undefeated in Big 12 Oklahoma and been the undisputed champ, because that's how round robin works. Plus, and out of conference, they would have beaten Pitt, a team that very well could have beaten the Big Ten champion in Penn State and the ACC champion in Clemson. The problem with Oklahoma State is they probably have the worst loss of all of these top 10 teams because their loss is against a Baylor team that very well could finish 6-6 and whose coach will not come back next year. So that's a pretty bad loss. It depends on how much you want to reward them for the win against Pitt, how much you consider the Central Michigan loss, which shouldn't have been a loss, but then you could say, well, it shouldn't have been close. Why were you that close to Central Michigan at home? I don't know. I think their case isn't as great as one would like it to be, but they certainly do have a case. All right, so we're here. The last team. Let's finally talk about Ohio State. I kind of talked about them a little bit, pretty much in every single team leading up to this, but real quick. Ohio State is ranked number 2 in the College Football Playoff Committee. They are considered a lock for the College Football Playoff, but should they be? Their resume is pretty good. If Oklahoma wins the Big 12 and Wisconsin wins the Big 10, they will have wins over 2 different conference champions. Their loss also is not a bad loss, unlike Michigan's, unlike Clemson's, unlike some of the other teams on this list, Oklahoma State, Colorado. Their loss is better than all of theirs. Their loss is to a Penn State team that is currently ranked number 7. And it was kind of a fluky loss. It was like 2 big special teams plays turned the entire course of that game. It was on the road in a hostile environment, sold out, whiteout game. You do have to give them a little bit of slack if you're comparing it against other teams' losses. They beat Wisconsin in overtime in Madison. They murdered a Nebraska team that Wisconsin had just taken to overtime. They beat a Michigan team that was ranked number 2 in the country at the time in double overtime. They would have crushed an Oklahoma team on the road that again could have won or might win the Big 12. Ohio State's resume is very, very good. But they did not win their division. They did not win their conference. They will not win either of those because Penn State and Wisconsin are playing each other for that. So are you going to reward a team for not having to play 13 games? The big question with this committee is, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to find the best teams or the most deserving teams? Because they're not always the same thing. My thoughts, and again, these are just my thoughts, and it comes from no malice towards Ohio State, just objectively looking at it. If Penn State wins the Big Ten championship, I do not see how you can put Ohio State in. I just don't. I know their resume is good, but Penn State beat them. The team that will win the division and the conference beat Ohio State. So why should Ohio State be rewarded for losing, especially if they get in over a Penn State team? I know life isn't fair. I know the world is a big, big place full of many opinions and ideas, and this is just mine. But I think whether Ohio State should be allowed to get into the college football playoff depends on who wins the Big Ten championship. I think if Wisconsin, they can say, we beat Wisconsin and we beat Michigan. Wisconsin's only losses were to us and Michigan. We have the tiebreaker. We beat both those teams. We're in now. And honestly, I'm okay with that. But if Penn State wins, I think Penn State should get the Big Ten spot. Now, if Washington and or Clemson lose the conference championship games, I think without a doubt Ohio State should get in. They should be the number 4 seed, but they should get in. But that leads me to my conspiracy theory. In 2014, in the very first college football playoff, in the very final rankings, you had undefeated 13-0 ACC champion, defending national champion Florida State. They were ranked number 3. Now, part of that is because, frankly, they just weren't that amazing of a team. They got down early a lot in those games and came back to win. But you had Alabama, who had a loss, and Oregon ahead of them. Now, why did they do that? Was it the right thing to do? No. I think because of the way they played, I didn't think they were one of the 4 best teams in the country. I just didn't. And I think what they should have done, if you were going to include them, is put them at number 4. They did not put them at number 4. They put them at number 3. Do you know why? My opinion is that they wanted Alabama and Florida State to play for the national championship. What they got instead was Oregon and Ohio State, something I'm not exactly sure they expected or wanted. Last year, they had Oklahoma number 3, Michigan State number 4, and Iowa number 5 in the next to last college football playoff rankings, the one that was just released this week. Michigan State beat Iowa in that long drive at the end of the Big Ten championship game. Then they move Michigan State up to number 3. Number 1 was Clemson. Number 2 was Alabama. Number 3 was Michigan State. And number 4 was Oklahoma. I think the politics decided that the most eyeballs to be drawn to the national championship game would be between Oklahoma and Alabama. And I think that they slotted teams that way in order to get that as a national championship game. Now, unfortunately for them and for the Sooners, Clemson won, and it was Clemson versus Alabama in a hell of a national championship game. I think this year, most people consider Ohio State and Alabama to be the 2 best teams in the country. I think also what they're trying to do is get Alabama and Ohio State to play each other for the national championship game, because that would draw the most money, that would draw the most interest, that would draw the most advertisers. Now, that is a college football conspiracy theory. That is what I think. Part of it, I don't blame the committee. I think that's their goal. I think their goal is to make the most interesting matchups. I think their goal should be to get the 4 best teams and rank them in order that they think is the best, and couple that with the most deserving teams. So, is Ohio State better than Penn State? Yeah, I think they are. Even though Penn State beat Ohio State. If those 2 teams played this past Saturday, who do you think would win? I think Ohio State would win. If those 2 teams had played a couple of weeks ago in the Horseshoe instead of in Happy Valley, do you think Ohio State wins? I think they do. But it doesn't matter what I think would happen. We have a result on the field. And it wasn't that long ago that that result happened. Penn State beat Ohio State. I don't know. That's just my thoughts on the matter. But here's the thing. The College Football Playoff Committee currently has Ohio State ranked number 2 in the rankings. They will not play this weekend because they lost. Because they lost to Penn State. They will not play this weekend. But what is unfair to them is if for some reason they drop to number 5. Because you have them at number 2, they are almost a guaranteed lock, whether they deserve it or not. Because, just like with TCU in 2014, I think it would be really crappy and below board for the committee to take a team that they say, this is number 2. This is the number 2 team. This is the 2nd best team in the country. And then drop them to number 5 or 6, like they did TCU a couple of years ago, Because, TCU even played on championship Saturday. They killed Iowa State like 66-10, and they dropped 3 spots? What the hell was that? There was no reason for that. The only reason for that, I think, is politics. But they cannot do that to Ohio State. It was wrong then. It's wrong now. So Ohio State, I think you are a lock for the college football playoff at the number 2 spot, assuming Alabama does not royally mess up this weekend and lose to Florida. I think you're number 2. I think you're going to play Clemson in the Fiesta Bowl out in Arizona. Okay, so that was a lot. It's a lot of unpacking. That's my thoughts on everything. This video is a little bit longer because next week I'm just going to talk about the top 4, maybe the top 6 teams, depending on what the College Football Playoff Committee does on my video on Sunday, on my playoff reaction release video. Please let me know what you guys think and try to keep hatreds out of it. I don't care who you root for. I don't care who you root against. I don't care if you hate Ohio State, if you think Michigan should have beat Ohio State, if you think, I don't care. It doesn't matter. I just want an objective point of view. That's what I try to do on this channel, regardless of who I root for, root against. I try to be as objective as possible, and I'd like you guys to do that too. I want to hear what you think. Should Ohio State get into the college football playoff? Even if, as I think, they're probably one of the best teams in the country. Best top 2, definitely top 4, but are they the most deserving? Let me know down in the comment section. Thank y'all so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe by clicking the red box right there. If you want to catch my top 25 video, click here or down there for another video of your choosing. Thank you guys again. I really appreciate it. We will all be as surprised as each other based on what happens on Sunday at the Bowl Selection Show. All right, so let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is I think only the top 10 teams have a realistic shot to get in. I'm going to talk about all 10 of them, even Michigan, who I think is pretty much ruled out, but we'll talk about them, and I'll kind of go down the list, and I'm going to save Ohio State for last because they are clearly the wild card. They are clearly the biggest story in college football right now, so I'm going to save them for last. I have thus eliminated Michigan. So now there are 9 teams that I feel can fill the 4 spots and lead us into the 2016 college football playoff. This week, at least 2 of those 9 will be eliminated as Penn State faces Wisconsin in the Big Ten Championship, and Oklahoma faces Oklahoma State in the de facto Big 12 Championship. Before I get into the actual Eliminator and talk about each team and their chances and all that fun stuff, I do want to mention the bowl system. So last week, I did not mention teams that were ineligible for bowls or teams that were on the brink, and that is because, as usual, there's too many bowl games to properly fill the slots with everyone who doesn't even have a winning record, who just has 6-6 record. So we're going to have at least, I believe, 5 teams that are 5-7 make it in this year. Last year we had 4. So that sucks, and that's something that needs to change, but it won't because of money. Those 5 teams will be chosen based on their highest APR, I believe, over the last 2 years. I have no idea who that'll be, so to the last third of the year. So I'll definitely be doing this again next year, so thank you guys. So in last week's Eliminator, we talked about how there was, in my opinion, 10 teams left for the national championship, including Western Michigan, who I still have in there, even though the College Football Playoff Committee hates them. And because they're undefeated, I keep them in there, and it's just fun to talk about them. But with Ohio State's victory over Michigan, albeit not without controversy, of course, in 2 overtimes at the Horseshoe. Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and welcome to the very last Eliminator of the 2016 college football season. There's no reason to have an Eliminator next week because we will already know who is in the playoff at that time. We will already know all of our conference champions. So this is the very last one of 2016. This has been a really cool video series that I've been able to do. I really have enjoyed making this. I enjoy talking about it and hearing back from you guys. So I wish I would have thought about this at the beginning of the year instead of closer to